Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Kentucky maple syrup project as part of Tree Week. I'm Jacob Muller. I'm an assistant professor of hardwood silviculture extension here at the University of Kentucky, and I'm joined with Billy Thomas, who's an extension forester here with University of Kentucky Extension as well. And so today we're going to be introducing you to a number of topics. Some perhaps if you're familiar with the maple syrup industry, you might be familiar with. Others it could be new to you, and so we're hoping to be able to share some information about maple syrup. And so Billy's going to kick it off and introduce you to production here in Kentucky, some history and current status of where we're at with our production of maple syrup, and then I'll introduce you to the project that we're working on as part of this extension work. And it's really a true example of what extension can do to work with our partners and landowners. And so we'll talk about some of those partners and then some resources for you and other opportunities for you to join us in talking about maple syrup and learning more about that. And you can see those activities there, and we'll talk about those and some dates coming up. And so Billy, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce us to maple syrup production.
Well, thank you, Jacob. I appreciate you all being with us today. We know you all could be doing some other things, but you chose to be with us during your lunch break. For that, thank you. Again, we're celebrating Tree Week this week, and here in Kentucky, we have a lot of trees, right, including maple trees, and we have quite a few maple trees, but we'll be talking about that. But Jacob and I thought it might be good to set a little context, right? A lot of people, when they think of maple syrup and that production, they think of New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, those areas, and there's no doubt they are major in that. But it's been going around here in Kentucky for a while too. So we want to give you a little brief timeline to kind of set the stage a little bit. The very first written account was by a French monk way back in 1557 of Native Americans making maple sugar. So they would take the syrup all the way down to sugar. And that was all the way back in 1557. So who knows when it really started, but that's the first written record. And a couple hundred years later, the Quakers were really promoting it as an alternative to the West Indian cane sugar, which was all slave produced. So they were trying to put this up as another alternative to that. And Thomas Jefferson actually got on board with that a few years later and started a maple plantation at Monticello as well. And for a long time, the way they would collect the maple syrup is basically they would make wounds on the tree, big old gouges, if you will, and then they would put collectors, reservoirs under those, hollowed out wood that would collect the sap. By 1810, we started using some wooden spouts. So they would basically take little pieces of wood and carve them out. And then by using augers, they could implant those spouts into the trees to make the sap collection much easier. And way back in 1818, maple sugar was selling for half the price of imported cane sugar. So it was a lot cheaper in that regard. Come 1860, we got away from the wooden spouts because they weren't really holding up and they wouldn't last very long, and they started using metal taps. So that was a big evolution in maple production. And then not too long after that, 15 years later, in 1875, we started using the metal buckets. And a lot of times people may think of those metal buckets as kind of the classic or the romantic way of collecting maple syrup. But please recognize that we've been collecting maple sap for many, many hundreds of years before that. And at 1885, cane sugar is now cheaper than maple sugar. So that was for the first time we saw that trade. And lo and behold, when cane sugar became cheaper, they started having a lot of people that started adding cane sugar to the maple sugar, basically cutting it with a cheaper product and then able to sell it at a higher rate. So by 1906, the U.S. Pure Food and Drug Act made it illegal to add any glucose to maple syrup. So that was an important thing. big. And, you got to give credit to really the Vermont Maple Syrup Association had formed a few years before that, and they were really trying to get a good handle on the production and the industry and how it was being done. And they wanted to make sure it was done pure and not being adulterated. So they played an important role in that. Progress keeps going. 1916, we started maple tubing was invented, and it was metal tubing. And, unfortunately, it did not work very well because it would freeze up and it was prone to leakage. So that didn't last very long. So there was still a lot of bucket collection going on. But by 1959, plastics were starting to roll. And that was really the first set of kind of plastic tubing that came in place. And that really is kind of the predominant way that any of our producers are going to collect maple sap is through plastic tubing systems. And then in 1970s, a really big breakthrough came with reverse osmosis. And we'll talk about how much sugar is in maple sap. But so it's really important to be able to kind of concentrate that as quickly as you can. And the reverse osmosis technology allows them to do that. Basically, you can get rid of a lot of water really quickly. And that saves you a lot of time cooking down that sap. So it was a big innovation. And then jump ahead another 50-some years. And in 2019, really driven by some of our county extension agents in Eastern Kentucky and some producers across the state, there was growing interest in maple syrup production. So we got together with Virginia and hosted the very first Kentucky Maple School. That was in Whitesburg, Kentucky. And then actually at the end of that meeting, the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association formed. So that was really kind of an exciting development. And then that very next year, they had the very first, the inaugural Kentucky Maple Day. And Jacob will tell you about the Maple Day coming up next year. But that's just a little brief, intro into maple syrup production, its history. So let's talk about how much we're producing here in the United States. This table, most of the data you're going to see comes from the National Agricultural Statistical Service or Statistics Service. They're a branch of the USDA, and they collect a lot of data on crop production throughout, including maple syrup. So just want to draw your attention way back in 1997. We had really about 1.3 million gallons of maple syrup were produced in the United States. Oh, sorry. Let me go back there. And then, that kind of went up in 2007 to up to 1.5 million gallons, which is quite a bit. But look at the huge jump we saw up to 2017. So that period from 27 to 2017 really saw a big expansion and growth of maple syrup. And you can see the prices of maple syrup have kind of climbed and, plateaued a little bit there in 2019, which was the last year we had data available. But in 2019, we were producing 4.3 million gallons. But look at how much we were also importing, 6.4 million. So we'll talk about that as we go forward a little bit. So, we want to get a handle on, how much production is going on out there. And of course, we use taps and maple trees to collect that sap. So this is a chart here showing the distribution of taps back in 1997. Again, this data comes from the National Agricultural Statistics Service. You can quickly get on there if you're interested and find all kinds of interesting stats about agriculture. But Vermont, by far the leader. They had 2.2 million taps way back in 1997. And if you look over here at Kentucky on the far right, we had a total of 1,868 taps. So the orders of magnitude are way different here, what we're talking. In total, back in 1997, at least reported, we had a little over 8 million taps in the United States collecting maple sap that would be turned in. Progress another 10 years or so to 2007, and things go up a little bit. Vermont's still the lead, and they have really jumped ahead of Maine and the others at this point. They're up to 2.7 million taps. And then we got Kentucky over here. We saw a big jump too. We're up to 2,500 taps here in Kentucky back in 2007 for a total of a little over 8 million taps back in 2007. And then, like we saw earlier, there was a big jump between 2017 compared 2007 and 2017, as you can see here, Vermont exploded. They really more than doubled the number of taps that they had in less than 10 years, to where they're approaching nearly 6 million taps. We also saw a lot of growth in Kentucky as well. We eclipsed 12,000 taps for the first time, at least documented, in Kentucky back in 2017. In total, there were nearly 15 million taps collecting maple sap back in 2017. So we'll see when those numbers come out again. They do these surveys every 5 years, but I've just shared, in 10-year increments just to save a little time for you. But we've got another survey coming up in 2022, and we'll see how those numbers change then. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about Kentucky. How many taps do we have in Kentucky? I showed you some of those numbers, but what is that distribution? Back in 1997, we only had 3 counties reporting that they had maple syrup production going on for those 1,800 taps. By 2007, that jumped up to 17 counties were reporting maple syrup production in Kentucky at over 2,500 taps. And then another 10 years later, we see another huge jump. So we're now up to 32 counties have some type of reported maple syrup production going on with over 12,000 taps. Now, there's a lot of other producers, a lot of other backyard producers and hobby producers and small scale producers that may not be reflected in these statistics just the way the surveys work. But just recognize that growth, that there's a growing interest and there's growing production of maple syrup here in Kentucky. So one of the reasons that's growing is because we got a lot of maple trees here in Kentucky. Sugar maple is the classic example we think of when we think about maple syrup. It is the one that has the highest sugar concentration in its sap. And if you look at the data from the U.S. Forest Service, who collects annual inventory data in Kentucky, this is just Kentucky, we have over 33 million maple trees that are at least 11 inches in size. So, to be tappable, you're going to be around that 10-inch diameter in size. In total, looking at how many sugar maples we have in the state, these would be 700 million maple trees in Kentucky. Now, as you can tell from those numbers, though, a lot of those are smaller than 10 inches. So the future is bright as far as a lot of trees being out there. But we also have a lot of red maple trees here in Kentucky, and they, fortunately, can also be tapped. And we don't have quite as many that are tappable currently, but if you'll look at that total number, you'll see that number is really larger than the sugar maple. So we expect red maples to really eclipse sugar maples as far as numbers and volume, sometime in the near future for sure. But, those aren't the only 2 trees that can provide maple sugar or maple sap, and that is also includes box elder. Box elder, believe it or not, is part of the acer or maple family, and we have some of those, not as many, but you can collect maple sap from these box elder trees. So if you've got any of these trees on your property, these are going to be the trees that are going to have the highest sugar concentrations. There are some other maple trees in Kentucky that do have varying amounts of sugar, but these are the most prominent and the ones you're most likely to see in the state. But again, any of these can be tapped for maple sap. So looking at the actual number of tappable trees, a little more breakdown on that. So this is, again, some data from that forest inventory analysis. So just looking at trees greater than 10 inches, we have over 22 million right now in Kentucky that are ready to go at that 10-inch category. And you can see we don't have a lot in those super larger categories, but there are a lot of trees. And as these trees grow, these 10-inch trees will soon become 12-inch and so on and so forth. So we expect this will kind of be shifting as we go. And then looking at basically the abundance, just another way to look at some of that data. Look at how many baby maple trees we have in the state. So this speaks to the future potential of maple production here in Kentucky. And that also speaks to a large extent of why Jacob and I and the whole, or at least a number of us in the UK Forestry and Natural Resources Extension team are involved in trying to support our producers here in the state. So with all of that information, I thought it might be a fun little way to interact with you. So get your keyboards ready. I've got some quizzes. I'd like to see some answers in the chat pod if we can. I'm going to try to go ahead and pull up the chat pod so I can see these answers as you all, if you don't mind. So I'm going to present some questions for you all. Just want to kind of gauge your knowledge about maple syrup and maple syrup production. So try to have a little fun with this and let me know what you think about these questions. So which country produces the most maple syrup? So I went over, yeah, Deb, you're fast. Oh man, all of you. All right. So, all right. There's no tricks here, right? It is Canada by far. Canada produces almost 70%, give or take, each year it probably varies a little bit, but 70% of all the maple syrup produced in the whole world comes from Canada. And really most of that is in Quebec. So it's really kind of narrowly focused in that region, kind of the eastern Canada part, but it is big. When you think about maple syrup, you can think of Canada like you think of OPEC. They are the controlling, basically, entity when it comes to maple syrup. They have huge maple syrup stockpiles and reserves, and they test that all the time, and they kind of slowly release it based on market demand and all kinds of stuff. But they are the big dog when it comes to maple syrup production in the world. All right, so let's talk a little bit. When does maple sap flow? And I'm talking about, we're out there tapping. So do you all have a handle on when we're tapping the trees? And I will tell you, one of the great things that we think about maple syrup is it's an activity that can occur when it's kind of a downtime in other agricultural activities. So typically what we will see, what you need is freezing nights and then the temperature to go above freezing during the day. So in Kentucky, a lot of times we end up doing that basically late December through mid-February. So January is kind of our peak season in many instances, and that varies a little bit from location within Kentucky. It also varies from year to year, but we have slowly been seeing a latening, if you will, of when the the sap is flowing from the trees. And I'm sure that's associated with climate change. As the climate changes, things change with this as well. But we're still getting good sap flow there for, 4 to 5 week period. And again, it will vary a little bit from spot to spot. All right, let me ask you this question. What is the maximum recommended number of taps per tree? Right. I said that we can tap a tree at about 10 inches or so. Some people go smaller than that, and some people wait till a little bit bigger. But typically, there is a limit, right? We don't want to fill a large tree up with taps because the tree needs that sap for its own good. So typically 3. That's right, Rebecca. You got that one. Good job. You and Josie too, and some others got that. Great. So we're looking at about 3 taps as a maximum. So that once trees get up to about 24 inches or so, we can put about 3 taps in. But that's really the max. The other important thing we need to note is that you need to move these taps every year, right? Because you don't want to tap into dead wood. So these taps need to come out after the season is over, and then you need to find a new location for those taps. So typically, you'll move them at least 6 inches left or right and 6 inches up and down so that you can kind of get into clean wood. And you'll just kind of keep moving around the tree as you do that. So that's pretty interesting. All right, let me ask you this. How much sap does a maple tree produce in a season? Now, of course, it's going to vary a little bit, with smaller trees producing less and bigger trees. But there is kind of an average that we think of when we think about how much sap can we get out of a tree. And, again, we're going to have to convert that sap into syrup. So, Joe, 5 gallons. Jerry, up to 15. Andrew, 3. Good guesses, all good guesses. And I would tell you all, you're all right? There's some trees that are going to produce exactly that amount, and there's some trees that are going to produce a little bit less. But typically what we see is you're going to get anywhere from 10 to 20 gallons of sap out of a tree in a season. Now, of course, smaller trees are going to be closer to that 10-inch. Larger open grown trees are going to be up to that 20 gallons. And forest grown trees that maybe not have as large a crowns, you're probably going to be closer to that, that 12 to 15 if it's a large tree. So it's going to vary a little bit, obviously, but that's kind of the range. So you can kind of know what to expect, how much sap I'm going to get out of a single tree. Yeah, again, bigger crowns and more sap. And so, again, healthy crowns produce more sugar, and that's what we're looking for, right? All right, so let me ask you this. How much maple sap does it take to make a gallon of maple syrup? All right, so we get all of this sap, but we know that it's mostly water, right? 80 gallons, 20 gallons, 40 gallons, and and of course it's going to vary, right? It's going to be based on how much sugar is in that sap. So obviously, if there's more sugar in the sap, it's going to take fewer gallons. What we say typically, if you're around that 2% sugar, you're going to be getting close to 40 gallons. And if you're down in that 1.25 to 1.5% sugar, closer to 65 gallons. So it's going to vary, and that varies a little bit from year to year. All right. So, and I just kind of gave that away a little bit. So what is the average percentage of sugar in maple sap? And since I did give it away, basically we use 2% as a magic threshold. But I will let you know that red maple trees are going to come in less than that. And not all sugar maples will hit 2%. Some will be a little higher. Some will be a little lower. It's just going to kind of vary. But, 2% is a rule of thumb that we use when we talk about sugar maple, and probably closer to about 1.5% when we talk about red maple. But again, we've seen some red maples have more sugar content than the sugar maple. So it's going to vary based on the tree and the tree's health, the tree's vigor, the microclimate that tree's growing in, and the climate that it's experienced in the previous growing season. So a lot of factors come into play. But again, we're around that 2%. Is what we're thinking about. All right. So let me ask you this. If we keep cooking maple sap, eventually we're going to get to maple sugar. So, but before I get there, what is the average percent of sugar of maple syrup? So if you take that sap and we get it all the way down to maple syrup, what's the percentage of that is now sugar, right? So we started out at 2%. So to become maple syrup, where do we need to get? What sugar concentration do we need to get? That's what I'm trying to ask. Jerry, man, you are good at this. Jerry's right on. That 66 to 67% is what we're looking at. That is exactly where we want to try to get to. And then you want to basically, you got to pull it off at that point, right? You don't want to go any further unless you're planning to make a maple sugar out of that. And then what they do is they continue to cook it a little further. And then as it's cooling, they really kind of beat it and whip it until it kind of granulates down into sugar. So that's a little quiz, Jacob. I hope I've warmed them up for you to let them know about the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project and how they can participate in it.
Great. Thanks, Billy. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much, Billy. That was such great information, the history, and thank you all for taking part in that little quiz. I hope that was fun for you. So I'm going to chat a little bit about this project. You've probably seen the logo on a few of those slides before, the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project. Okay. This is a project that us here in UK Forestry Extension got involved with last year. And it really developed from this need. The landowners, the woodland owners who were producing maple syrup came to their county extension agents looking for help, support. Those agents came up to us here at on campus as extension specialists, and we saw the value in this project, as Billy mentioned, to help landowners engage with their woodlands and take part in this fun activity. And so it's really this classic example of what extension can do for you, for a landowner, working with partners. We're going to talk about those partners. But the key piece here is this collaborative effort, this collaboration between UK Forestry, a number of partners in our CS, and I'll mention a few more partners here in a minute. Let's see. But our goal here, especially us at UK Forestry Extension, we're trying to facilitate, right? We're trying to help producers get the resources they need, and that includes doing things like we're doing today, jumping on with you and talking about maple syrup, trying to provide you with some information and some resources. And we're really trying to build a community. And I think we've started off this past year with this grant that we were awarded. It's called an ACER grant. And we actually brought $500,000 USDA grant to Kentucky for the first time to help with this community building, to enhance and support the Kentucky maple syrup industry. Okay. And we're doing this to support a number of programs through rural development, and ultimately trying to promote sustainable agricultural and forestry practices, right? This is something that I'm really passionate about, is sustainable active forest management. And this avenue through maple syrup, folks who maybe have not engaged with their woodland before, and are realizing this opportunity to get out, whether it's a hobby that you want to start, this endeavor, or you're thinking about investing some time and some funding to try to actually create a business out of this, right? And so we're hoping that we can help educate and share the information that we're learning through this project. And we actually have a community science project where we're working with landowners to get some data back to us about the amount of sugar that they're collecting, the sugar content, as well as some temperature gradients, so that we can continue to learn more about Kentucky maple syrup. And we're going to share those resources. We're going to hope to help increase our own connection with landowners and the land. And the benefit is really this really sugary, sweet resource, this opportunity that we have here in Kentucky. And as I mentioned before, we are partnering with some amazing organizations. Us here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. A partner of ours is KCARD, the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, who've been amazing in helping us facilitate a lot of these workshops, and working directly with the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association to kind of bridge that gap. The NRCS and 4-H are such important partners that we have. Just getting folks out there engaged and taking part in this. And speaking of taking part in these projects, we have some upcoming programs, and this is part of that project that we're working on. We're going to put on a series of workshops every year for at least the next 3 years. Our first workshop was actually back in September, on September 14th. We put this on via Zoom online, and this is an introduction to maple syrup. We talked about some of the things that we talked about here today, as well as had some great guest speakers, some county agents that have shared their experiences here. And if you'd like access to this, you can still watch the recording of this video. You just have to go to our website, as you see there on the bottom, and you'll register for it, but you'll get a link to the video. Okay, I'm going to move on, but I'll share this email or this website on some future slides as well. Okay. Speaking of upcoming programs, we actually have a program tonight. Okay, at 7 o'clock Eastern. It'll run for about an hour and a half, and this is the Maple Syrup Toolbox. Okay, this is kind of a continuation. If you have time, you could go back and watch the one from September 14th, and then still join us this evening. This will be recorded if you can't attend tonight, but it's going to be talking about your sugar bush. So your sugar bush is essentially your maple woodland, right? That you're going to be collecting syrup from, collecting maple sap, the tubing, vacuum, in different processes, reverse osmosis, to get that sap from the tree and into the bucket or the storage tank, right? We're going to talk about marketing maple syrup. So these are for producers who are thinking about, maybe I'd like to sell the maple syrup that I'm producing, right? And then some additional resources. Okay. We have a field day at the Davis Farm on October 23rd. And I do apologize, this one is filled up at the moment. We had to cap off our registration due to a number of things. A lot of that's related to the space that we have available there, and still trying to maintain some social distancing and trying to do what we can. But we do have another amazing program again or upcoming on November 6th, and this is our Kentucky Maple School, right? And this is going to be held online and hosted by Letcher County Extension Office and agents, the county agents that are involved with this project. We have a great guest speaker, Dr. Abby Vandenberg from the University of Kentucky, who's an expert on maple syrup. And we're going to have a bunch of topics and hopefully help you learn more about maple syrup. Right. And we have resources here. We've developed a website where we house everything that we're involved with from UK Extension. So you can visit our website if you want to jot this down, or maybe Billy put that up in the chat pod, ky-maplesyrup.ca.uky.edu. And you'll come to a homepage there that you can kind of see in that right-hand side of this slide. There's a bunch of information from the history, talking about all of our upcoming programs and our workshops. Our research tab is on there, and that's where you'll find more information about our community science project, or our community science project working with landowners. And we've got a series of videos that can help you learn more about maple syrup. Okay. All right. And lastly, getting involved. We're just so eager to work with landowners. There's so many opportunities for folks. For me, it's a passion because I want to get folks engaged with their woodlands, right? And maple syrup is a fun activity to go out, even if you just have a handful of trees that are maple, you can still produce some homemade maple syrup, right? We're looking for interested landowners to become producers as part of our projects that we're working on. As part of this grant, this ACER grant, we're trying to enhance and promote the industry. And so we want to work with you on helping that. Okay. And we do this through all of our amazing partners and our extension team, different extension educators from 4-H, FCS, topics about cooking with maple syrup, and our agriculture and natural resource county extension agents actually able to go out and work directly hands-on with a lot of producers. So I'm going to end with a note to mark your calendars. Kentucky Maple Days is such an amazing event that's hosted here in the state or across the state, where you can get out and meet producers, purchase some amazing maple syrup products, learn about folks, producers, operations, their sugar bush, and really just connect with the community, kind of continue to build this community. And so that's going to be on February 5th. We'll have a lot more information about that upcoming, but we hope that you'll join us for our upcoming workshops tonight. If you are interested, please join us and register for that. So with that, I think I'll stop sharing.
Great job, Jake. Appreciate that. Jerry, you were like spot on all the questions. Are you a producer? So, still got you muted there, Jerry. I don't know if you can unmute that. There you go.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Small time producer. Have done kind of experimentally a couple of years, produced about a gallon of what is syrup. I still have some quality issues that I'm trying to figure out, but yes.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. Really neat. Well, I'm pretty new to it. I've never produced a gallon of syrup by myself, to be honest. But I have been around this a little bit, and it is a lot of fun and really exciting. One of the things I've really enjoyed about meeting a lot of producers is, how excited they are about it, and how it can be such a community event. A lot of the sugar shacks you'll see just loaded with people from the community and neighbors and family members when they're cooking it down. So it's exciting to kind of get people excited about a forest product or a tree product. So what a great way to celebrate Tree Week than a beautiful product we get from trees. Anybody got any questions? Jacob and I certainly would do our best. We will have some probably some more specific expertise tonight. So if you do have any burning questions, please join us this evening. Go back and check out last month's webinar. We'd love to have you all part of this community. Michael, great question. How much does it cost to get into small production, right? So that's obviously it's going to vary a little bit, but you can get really started pretty cheap. Jacob, I think we were able to get some kits out for about 10 trees, 10 to 15 trees, I think for about $200, wasn't it? So about $200 in buckets and tubing and taps it would get you there. Then you got to have some way to cook it down. You do not want to cook maple syrup or maple sap down in your house. Do not do that. Way too much moisture is going to be released. It'll cause a lot of problems. And if you're married or live with somebody, they will hate you. So don't do that. I tried that with boiling peanuts. It's not a good idea with that either. So, however, you can do it on a propane little burner, right? Like a turkey fryer. I've seen people do that with pans on that. So you don't have to get too sophisticated in that regard if you're at a very small scale. So, it's going to depend a little bit, Michael, about how you want to get involved, how serious you want to get involved with it. Now, you can start getting into some of these evaporators that cost $8,000 to $25,000. If you're really producing it, you can really spend a lot of money in this area. But nice thing about it, it's approachable at really small scale, and people can kind of get their feet wet and see if it's something they're passionate about, and then develop. One thing I will tell you is every maple syrup producer could sell every drop they make here in Kentucky. That's the thing that we heard repeatedly from all of our members of the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association. They just can't produce enough. They really can't. The demand is so high for it, they can sell it all. So, if that's something that's interesting to you all, come learn more, right? Like Jacob said, we don't have all the answers for here in Kentucky, but we're trying to bring together all the people and work together to try to address those answers and help people going forward. All right, I was trying to give you all time to stick some questions in there. All right. Well, folks, we don't want to keep you, but again, we thank you for being with us. We thank you for your interest. And, Jacob, hopefully some of them will join us.
Yeah, no, we would love to see you tonight and continuing on with our workshop series. A lot of these kind of build and start to kind of get more and more advanced. And so we kind of start with the baseline with the one back in September, and we're building on that. So if this is something that interests you, we would love to connect with you and help you however we can, connect with the resources. And so, hope to see you tonight.
Excellent. Angela, great. Yeah, get out there. At a minimum, buy maple syrup from maple syrup producers here in Kentucky, please, at a minimum. Even if you're not a producer, at least you can support them, because it's a lot of work to produce this. It really takes a lot of effort. So you can understand why it's expensive, because there's a lot of time invested in it. But all right. Well, Jacob, great job. Come join us, be part of the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project.
All right, everyone. Happy Tree Week.
Happy Tree Week.